Hello everyone, Mariko, residential realtor with the Bridgewell Real Estate Group, and welcome back to the Bridgewell Group YouTube channel where I talk about all things real estate, specifically in my market, which is the Greater Vancouver area of British Columbia, Canada. But I also talk about things provincially and federally, so make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. And in today's video, I am going to be talking about deposits versus the down payment. This is a very, very important topic, and while there are similarities between the two and they're definitely intertwined, there are also very significant key differences. And so in this video, I will break down what is a deposit, what is a down payment, and then the key differences of the amounts, the timing of when they are due, and then also who they are held by. So let's just get into it. So I'm going to be getting into a side-by-side breakdown on a whiteboard of the deposit versus the down payment, and then also some examples of like where a deposit can equal a down payment, where a deposit can be less than the down payment. So I'll get into that a little bit later, but I think it's first important to just start with the basics, like what is a deposit and then what is a down payment. So I think that where people get confused is that the deposit forms a part of your down payment. So the deposit is kind of the same thing, but it's also not the same thing, right? So what is the deposit? The deposit is good faith money that is held in trust to secure that property until the completion date when title actually transfers and you owe the rest of your down payment. So to really understand that, you kind of have to have some basic terminology, right? So when you get an accepted offer on a property, usually you have a subject removal period, which is the time for the buyer to do their due diligence, right? And then if you're check for financing, check for inspection, check for documents, and everything is good, that's typically when you would hand in that deposit to secure the property and say like, yes, I'm happy with everything, I'm committing to it, and here is some good faith money to show that I'm going to complete, essentially, right? Because the completion day is the day that title transfers. That's also usually simultaneous with possession day, which is when someone moves in or moves out, right? And that is often much later. So it can be, as short as 2 weeks from subject removal, but it's common to see it be 2 to 3 months after subject removal. So the deposit makes a lot of sense when you understand the timeline of a real estate purchase or transaction, because you can see why it would be important to have some of that good faith money to secure the property earlier on, rather than having the seller be at complete risk and just wait until the completion date to receive all of their money. So long story short, the deposit is good faith money given by the buyer, held in trust to secure that property until completion. Now, the down payment is the total amount that you as a buyer are putting down towards the purchase. So most people need to qualify for a mortgage in order to purchase real estate. And so essentially the way that it works is like the purchase price is comprised of your down payment funds, the amount of money that you are personally putting towards the property, and then the amount that the bank is funding you via a mortgage. And so there are minimum down payment requirements that are federally regulated in Canada that you have to abide by, and it depends on the purchase price that you are purchasing at. So where people get confused is that your deposit forms a part of your down payment. So if you are putting a 5% deposit at subject removal, but you're planning on putting 20% down total, then that means that at completion, when your down payment is due, you are paying the remaining amount of your total down payment. So in other words, if you already have 5% deposit put down, then you would pay 20% less the 5% you've already put down, which means your remainder due at completion would be 15% towards your down payment plus any closing costs. Again, I am going to get into an example for this later, so let's just jump right into the whiteboard. So getting into the key differences between the deposit versus the down payment, I'm going to be breaking down the differences in terms of the amount, the due date, and then who the deposit versus the down payment is typically given to or held by. So starting off with the amount for the deposit, It depends on whether it's pre-sale or resale. So in a pre-sale situation, the contracts, the deposits, everything are all set by the developer. And so the developer's lawyer is going to have a contract that's drafted that will then stipulate how much the deposit is and what that deposit schedule is. It's common to see within the 10 to 20% range for the deposit over a period of time for pre-sales. But we've seen special incentives that are as low as 5%. I've seen as high as 25%. And it also depends on where they're at in the project and what restrictions like the bank has on them to get their financing. So keep in mind that the deposits for pre-sales can change, but generally this is what you should expect. Now with resales, it's a little bit different. There's no set standard, but there is an expectation. And generally that's going to be 5% of the purchase price. It could be a little bit lower. Obviously you can give more if you really wanted to incentivize the seller to take your offer, but just make sure that you have about 5% set aside for the deposit if you are looking to purchase real estate. With regards to the down payment, there are minimum down payment rules that apply. So the down payment is different than the deposit in the sense that there is just an expectation for the deposit, whereas with the down payment, it's actually federally regulated by the government of Canada. So we're working with minimum down payment rules. If you are purchasing a property under $500,000, the minimum down payment is 5%. If you are purchasing a property up to 1.5 million, it works on a sliding scale. So the first 500K would be 5%, and then the portion between 500K and up to 1.5 mil would be 10%. Now, if you are purchasing a property above $1.5 million, or you are purchasing an investment property, then the minimum down payment is 20%. And so your deposit forms a part of your down payment. So if you have a deposit of 5% that you hand in at subject removal and you plan to put 20% down, then the remaining 15% would be due at completion, which I'm going to get into next. So the due date for deposits and down payments also drastically differ. And again, you really have to look at the contract and have a discussion with your realtor, as this can be drafted differently from contract to contract. And I've done a whole separate video on deposits if you are looking for differences in timeline, but today I'm just going to talk very generally what you should expect. So the due date, as I said, depends on the contract. For pre-sales, it's set by the developer and it's usually over a period of time. So for example, you might see like $1,000 at contract signing, and then the remaining 10% at the 7-day rescission period, and then maybe 5% at the 6-month mark and 5% at the 12-month mark. That's just an example, but essentially it's over a period of time. And that's also because the minimum expected deposit is a lot larger in pre-sale versus resale. Now, with resale, we're typically dealing with the deposit, again, of that rough 5% being due at subject removal, upon or within 24 hours of subject removal. Or if you're dealing with a subject-free offer, then it's either going to be upon or within 24 hours of acceptance, or more typically, I would say upon or within 24 hours of that rescission period. So again, it totally depends on the contract, but this is kind of just what you can expect. Now, the down payment is completely different. This is going to be due at the latest at completion. But when you're dealing with the down payment, you're dealing with the lawyer and notary that you've chosen to represent you. And so it's more common than not that you're meeting with that lawyer usually 1 to 3 business days prior to completion, just to make sure things go smoothly. And you're going to be handing in your final remaining down payment plus any closing costs at that lawyer's signing appointment. And that kind of leads us into who the deposit versus down payment is held by. And so again, as you can kind of see a theme, it depends on the contract, but with pre-sales, typically the deposit is going to be written out to the developer's lawyer, always in trust. Whereas with a resale situation, it's very common for it to be going to the buyer's agent's brokerage in trust. So in trust means that this party is acting as a stakeholder, they're a neutral party, and they're just holding that deposit because typically you have not chosen your lawyer or notary who will represent you at that point in time until a little bit later and closer to completion, right? So that's where it differs is that with down payments, you are going to be giving that final bank draft, that final remaining down payment and closing costs to your buyer's lawyer in trust. And again, any deposit that you've put forward will be transferred to your lawyer, and then that deposit will form a part of your down payment, and you just have to bring forward any remainder. So just going back to the deposit, as you can see here, this doesn't go to the seller. So if you sell your home, the deposit from the buyer doesn't go straight into your pocket. Typically it goes into a brokerage trust account, right? So you cannot be using that deposit that you're getting from the sale of your home to purchase your next property and use that as a deposit. When you're selling your home, you don't get any funds, any equity, anything like that until you actually complete and everything is signed off and title is transferred with the lawyers. So I want to go through an example of where deposit can equal the down payment, or also show you when the deposit can be less than the down payment, and just following through on those amounts and how they can differ, and then also just give you guys a visual representation of the timeline. So just going back and putting together that whole timeline, let's say that we're in a resale situation, right? So pre-sale is totally different, but we're in a resale situation. We have an accepted offer, we have a 7-day subject removal, and in resale, we know that typically the deposits are going to be due upon or within 24 hours of the subject removal period, and it's going to be about 5%. So let's assume the deposit's 5%. Then when is the down payment going to be due? That's going to be at the agreed upon completion date, but typically you're going to sign off with a lawyer that 1 to 3 business days before. So it'll be somewhere around this completion date range, but just not later than it. And you're going to be paying the remaining down payment plus any closing costs at that lawyer signing appointment in order for the property to complete and move into the buyer's name. So let's take a purchase price example of $500,000, right? So we know that the expectation for deposits is 5%. So 500K, 5%, that is $25,000, right? Now with down payments, we also know that there is a minimum down payment requirement set by the government, right? So when we're working with a 500K number, that is 5%. The minimum down payment is 5%. So that means that in this situation, if you're dealing with a 500K purchase price, that you could have this deposit, right, equal your down payment, because the minimum down payment is 5%. So what that means is that when you put your deposit down at subject removal, you could get to completion, and because you've already satisfied your minimum down payment requirement, all you need to bring are the closing costs. So maybe that's property transfer tax, maybe that is the lawyer fee, right? There's other closing costs that you have to be aware of, but this is a situation where the deposit could equal the down payment. Now let's take a different situation, right, where we're dealing with a $1 million purchase price. Now, the minimum down payment for this is 5% on the portion that is up to 500K. And then for the portion between 500K and 1.5 million, it's 10%, right? So what is that portion? 1 million less 500K. The remaining amount is another 500K, right, to total 1 million. So 10% of 500K is 50K. 5% of 500K is 25K. So that means that for $1 million, the minimum down payment is 75K, right? So in this same situation, right, your deposit's due upon or within 24 hours of subject removal. You put that 5% deposit down as that good faith money to secure the property, and then completion comes around, right? And you know that your total minimum down payment is $75K. So you've already given 25, so you take the $75K that you're required to put down, you minus the $25K that you've already put down, and that means that the remainder that you need to bring is $50,000 plus any closing costs. So this is an example of where the down payment would be greater than the deposit. But if you are trying to figure out what the differences in the amount are going to be between the two, you basically just need to figure out what your deposit amount is supposed to be based on the expected amount of like the seller and what you guys can agree to between the seller and the buyer, what the minimum down payment requirement is based on your purchase price, and then of course how much you want to put down as a result of that. Do you want to put more than the minimum down? Do you want to just put the minimum down? These are all things that you need to consider when you are trying to figure out the difference between your personal deposit versus down payment. Thank you so much for watching this video on deposits versus down payments. Again, my name is Mariko and I'm a residential realtor with my team, Bridgewell Real Estate Group, and we are located in the Greater Vancouver area of British Columbia, Canada. So if you are looking to buy, sell, invest, whether that be pre-sale or resale, definitely feel free to reach out to our team to get started on that today. And I know that this is a lot of information, but we do have other related videos such as like just deposits in real estate. We have other ones just on pre-sale, so definitely make sure to refer to the rest of our YouTube channel, subscribe if you haven't already, and you can also check out our blog for more resources just like this. So thanks again for watching, guys, and have a great day.